Welcome back to the SportsMax Zone. Football's world governing body, FIFA and UEFA, the organization that governs the game in Europe, have suspended Russian football clubs and national teams from all competitions as the fallout from the country's invasion of Ukraine intensified on Monday. The decision came amid mounting pressure from the influential sporting and political bodies. Now, here's a rundown of how things unfolded over the last 24 hours. FIFA ruled Russia must complete remaining World Cup qualifying games in neutral territory under the title Football Union of Russia and without their flag and anthem. Following FIFA's decision, Scotland and the Republic of Ireland joined other nations like England and Wales, Poland, the Czech Republic and Sweden in refusing to play against Russia. Now, the IOC then recommended the suspension of Russian and Belarusian athletes and officials from international competitions. FIFA and UEFA suspend all Russian clubs and national teams from all competitions. The International Olympic Committee was among the leading voices in recommending the suspension of Russia. In a statement, the IOC Executive Board said its recommendation was made in order to protect the integrity of global sports competitions and for the safety of all participants. It actually explained that the current war in Ukraine puts the Olympic movement in a dilemma, while athletes from Russia and Belarus would be able to continue to participate in sporting events. Many athletes from Ukraine are prevented from doing so because of the attack on their country. Well, our European-based correspondent Simon Evans has been following the developments. Simon was among the first to actually report FIFA's intention to ban Russian teams. What do you make of today's development, Simon?
Yeah, I think after the IOC came out this morning and made their statement about recommending the suspension of Russian athletes from all competitions and Belarusian athletes, I think that put FIFA in a position where they had no choice, really. Yesterday's statement had been criticised, as we noted there in that section, particularly by Poland, neighbouring country of Ukraine, that's been very strongly making clear that they won't play Russia in that World Cup qualifier that they have. They have no intention of playing that game on a neutral ground. They were very strongly critical of FIFA's previous stance about playing on a neutral ground under another name and all the rest of it. And so I think FIFA was put in a position really where they had no choice. Joint meeting with UEFA this afternoon, and that decision came out.
How difficult was it to come to this decision, you feel? Because I know that you're touting this for quite a few hours based on the sources that you had. But how difficult, what's the impression that you got in terms of the difficulty of coming to this decision?
Yeah, I think it has been difficult for FIFA. I don't think they wanted to do this. And I think they were hoping that they could buy some time with that statement yesterday, really, and hope that in the next week there might be some sort of peace deal or some change in the situation on the ground in Ukraine, and they could then avoid having to suspend one of the most powerful federations in world football, who, of course, hosted the World Cup only 4 years ago. So, but I think once the IOC had taken that stance, and really the things that are happening on the ground as well sort of made it a decision that FIFA just had to take, really.
The pressure from the IOC in particular, was that really influential to FIFA, coming to this conclusion? Because there were voices elsewhere as well as on social media.
Yeah, I think on social media, I think that was a factor in this, I think, in terms of the pressure, because there were just so many people were up in arms about that statement yesterday, where they said they could play as the Russian Football Union and not Russia. I mean, really, does it make any difference at all if a team... We saw it at the Olympics with the Russian Olympic Committee athletes competing, not Russia. I mean, it makes no difference whatsoever. You can't have your anthem. Okay, is that really a sanction? And there was a lot of outrage about that on social media. A lot of support for the position that the Polish FA took, which was very strongly worded. I don't think the IOC put pressure on them directly. I don't think they were ringing up Gianni Infantino and saying, you've got to do this now. But I think once they'd come out with their own statement, it made it impossible for FIFA to continue trying to buy time.
Do you think that took them by surprise a little bit, the fact that there was a lot of outrage to that initial statement put out by FIFA?
Well, to be honest, if they're in touch with the kind of opinion that there's been out there in the public sphere and on social media, they shouldn't have been surprised, really. I mean, there's obviously very, very strong feelings about what's happening with Ukraine. And, you know, this morning I was looking, and it's one of those situations. Obviously, it's not about those of us who are far away from the conflict zone, and it's not about football, but I was watching some of the footage online of the rockets going into tower blocks in Kharkiv, and of course, you know, Kharkiv in 2012 was a host city to Euro 2012. You know, a lot of us were there. I spent 3 weeks in that city, and you're looking at it and seeing familiar buildings and rockets going into residential areas, and thinking, really, we're going to still continue with Russia playing in this competition in the World Cup? You know, I think a whole host of factors were behind that decision, and in the end, I think it was a decision that was inevitable.
Yes, Simon, and what type of image does FIFA paint of themselves, seeing that, you know, they changed their decision within 24 hours?
Yeah, I mean, they would argue that the statement did have a phrase there saying that, you know, if things don't change, they could move to do that. Now, why they needed to give that 24 hours to Russia? Did they really expect Vladimir Putin to turn around and go, oh, we've had an ultimatum from FIFA, we better stop this war in Ukraine? I mean, things don't work like that. And Putin might like football and sport, but it's absolutely of zero consideration to him at the moment. So I think they realized that they had to take a stronger step then. And obviously there's a whole series of sanctions that UEFA have taken on the club level as well. And in terms of their sponsorship with Gazprom, the big Russian company as well, that UEFA has now cancelled.
Right, and speaking about sanctions, now that the decision has been made, it's clear. Let's talk a bit about the repercussions for Russia, especially, you know, because World Cup qualification and all of that has been a part of the conversation.
Yeah, well, Russia were scheduled to play on March 24th at home against Poland in the first phase of the two-phase playoffs. As it stands, they're suspended. They won't be able to play that game. If they don't play that game, then they're out of the World Cup process, so they won't be going to Qatar. The only way that they could still be in the World Cup would be if that suspension was lifted because of circumstances changing on the ground. And I think that's why FIFA's used suspension rather than ban. If there was a peace deal next week and the violence stops and everyone goes home and things return to normal in Ukraine, then it's not out of the question then that FIFA could turn around and say, okay, you can play this game on a neutral ground or something. But it's very hard to imagine the circumstances where that would happen.
And did you get the impression from your sources that possibly that was a loophole that they were banking on just for it to kind of blow over that March 24th date? You know, just in case Russia, quote unquote, changes their mind about the situation in Ukraine?
Yeah, I think so. I think there was genuinely within FIFA people thinking, do we have to make a decision now? The game's not for 3 weeks. Things can change really quickly. All of which are valid things to say, but the reality is, you know, when something like that's happening and things are changing so quickly on the ground and public opinion around the world, really, especially in Europe where the qualifying games were going to happen as well, the feeling's so strong that people do expect you to act quickly. They do expect you to be decisive in this. And this is something that's changed, I think, that both the IOC and FIFA do struggle with a little bit. They like to take their time about decisions. They like to be the ones who feel they're in charge of the process. And in this social media world where the pressure builds up minute by minute, hour by hour, celebrities going online and saying this is a disgrace and so on and so forth. They don't like this, but that's the reality of the world we're now living in, and they're going to have to get used to it, really.
Well, the Russian billionaire businessman and owner of Chelsea Football Club, Roman Abramovich, is assisting to try and end the war between Russia and Ukraine. Spokesperson for Abramovich confirmed on Monday that he was approached by the Ukrainians, and he has been trying to help ever since this development came days after Abramovich handed over stewardship of Chelsea Football Club to trustees of their charitable foundation. That followed a leaked document brought to the UK Parliament which suggested that Abramovich should not be based in the UK, and led to calls from MP Chris Brard for his assets to be seized. Simon, explain exactly what is taking place here.
So the situation with Abramovich and Chelsea, with him handing over stewardship of the club, not control and ownership of it, he's still the owner of Chelsea, but saying, I'll not be involved day to day, I'm going to pass it on to the trustees of the foundation, which is a charity effectively. Now, when you look at that, and it was put out in a way by Chelsea which did suggest he was giving up control of the club, but then you look into it and you see that, well, the chairman of this board of trustees, Bruce Buck, is the chairman of Chelsea. So he's the person that Abramovich has trusted to be his chairman for the last several years. And he's going to still be that person. The head of finance for Chelsea is one of the trustees on the foundation. So the person who's been looking after all the money at Chelsea during Abramovich's time there is still going to be looking after the money. So there's a few other, there's Emma Hayes, who's the women's team coach there. There's Piara Power, who's involved in anti-racism work, who neither of whom I really think are going to be involved in day-to-day running of Chelsea. So what's changed really there? Not a lot has changed at all. And it looked a little bit of a cosmetic move coming after those comments from the Member of Parliament, Chris Bryant, as you said, and some newspaper articles as well, suggesting that that Abramovich might be removed from his position or some sort of sanction taken against his ownership of Chelsea. And then the next day, Chelsea had been criticised, again, going back to this social media world we live in. They were criticised that in that statement from Abramovich, there wasn't a word about the situation in Ukraine or about the war or the invasion or whatever. None of that language was in there at all. So Chelsea put out a statement yesterday, literally a one-line statement saying that they condemned or they were praying and hoping for the best in Ukraine. And then today we hear that Abramovich is a peacemaker, has been asked to intervene and so on. I'm sure Ukraine is asking lots of people to intervene and try and influence Vladimir Putin, who, of course, Abramovich has known for many, many years, to influence him to step back and send the troops back to Russia and so on. I've no doubt that it's true. Whether or not he's involved in intense negotiations in that or what's going on in terms of the detail of that, we don't know, and nothing has changed, and there's been no indication that the involvement of Abramovich has made any difference at all at this stage.
Simon, I just want you to explain for our audience in terms of the impact an owner would have on a Premier League club outside of the transfer windows. So if there's going to be any impact on him leaving, how it would affect Chelsea Football Club, or how he handles the situation and how he handles the club as well.
Oh, you mean if he was to be sanctioned? If he
was to be sanctioned either way?
Yeah, I mean, it would be an extremely drastic situation for Chelsea, because their whole finances for more than a decade have been connected to Roman Abramovich's largesse, and if he was to be put out of the situation, if he was no longer able to finance the club, there would be a lot of debt that needs to be dealt with by somebody. I have no doubt Chelsea's become, under Abramovich, a big enough global brand. He's been a very successful owner in terms of the things that Chelsea have won and the profile they have around the world. So I have no doubt at all that somebody would come in and buy Chelsea very quickly, but in the short term, it would be an extremely difficult situation for the club to deal with.
But in the context of the ownership, though, because this is the point that I wanted to explain to our viewers. What do owners do in the meantime when they're running a club outside of the transfer window? And would that be would him either leaving or stepping aside, giving stewardship to his charitable foundation, what kind of impact that would make in the meantime. It wouldn't really affect the football club now, would it?
No, as long as he's financing the club, it wouldn't affect them. But if he was actually sanctioned and they told him you can't put money into this club, you can't spend on it, it would affect their cash flow, obviously. But the kind of scenario that he's offered up, that he's going to hand over to the trustees of the foundation, something which hasn't actually happened yet, and which might not even legally be able to happen, because as I understand it, charities aren't allowed to run football clubs. They're supposed to be non-profit organisations, and that change of status for them could be something that's not as simple as it sounds. But him actually stepping back and handing that over day to day shouldn't make any difference. If he's still able to ensure that the cash is there in the club to pay the huge wages that Chelsea have, it shouldn't make any difference.
Well, Simon, thanks so much, and we look forward to connecting with you again as you continue to break all these news. But you're coming back with us for the next segment, so don't go anywhere yet.
We'll talk a bit of football, yeah?
Yeah, so stay with us. Donald, of course, this story making headlines, and, a lot of people like to say don't make sports and politics, but there comes a point in time where we don't really have a choice. It affects every one of us, and this situation is a perfect example of that. We see so many different things happening. Russia now, their football team won't be able to participate in international competitions.
It's funny, and you mentioned that, people always say don't mix sports and politics, but I think what people really want is for us to not mix sports and politicking. And I think that's the issue here, because I believe it's the right decision that FIFA has made. We can no longer separate Russia from its leader. There's a reason why we choose our leaders to represent us. And frankly, as leader, he's obviously representing the country and the people there. I know it's unfortunate for the athletes, but I mean, that's the only sanction that will hurt. And I think, as it has always been, in terms of holding our leaders accountable, it has to be led by the people on the ground.
Yeah.
So it's critical for FIFA to come to this decision, because that's all a part of helping with the fight.
Yeah, definitely a strong point there. When you said lead by example, I was wondering if you were talking about Russia and the fact that the citizens
the people.
are... Yeah.
The people.
All right, Donald. Well, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we continue talking football.